The wheelchair tipped backward with a sickening thud against the rubber playground mat. Gasps erupted from the cluster of parents who had been chatting peacefully moments before, their afternoon conversation severed by the sharp crack of metal hitting ground. Zoe Williams, 12 years old with bright yellow ribbons in her hair, lay sprawled beside her overturned chair, her dark eyes wide with shock and the beginnings of tears. Officer Marcus Brennan of the Willowbrook Heights Homeowners Association Security Force stood over her, his thick frame casting a shadow across the colorful playground equipment. His face was flushed red, sweat beading on his forehead despite the mild October weather. "I told you to get off my property," he barked, his voice carrying across the entire recreational area. "These facilities aren't built for your kind of equipment." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the children who had been laughing and playing on the swings just minutes earlier had gone completely still, their small faces turned toward the scene unfolding near the accessible picnic tables. Mrs. Henderson, who lived in Unit 47 and walked her aging golden retriever past the playground every afternoon, fumbled for her phone with shaking hands. Zoe had been having such a perfect day. The autumn sun was warm on her shoulders as she navigated her wheelchair across the smooth rubber surface, racing her best friend Marcus, not the officer, but Marcus Chen, from her 7th grade class, toward the adapted swing set that had been installed just 2 months ago. She loved how the new equipment made her feel included, how she could transfer from her chair to the special swing seat and pump her legs in rhythm with the other kids. The Willowbrook Heights Community Playground had undergone renovations over the summer, part of a county-wide initiative to make public spaces more accessible. The rubber matting had been specifically chosen for its wheelchair-friendly surface, replacing the old wood chips that had made navigation impossible for mobility devices. Zoe's mother, Judge Patricia Williams, had advocated strongly for these improvements during the town council meetings, though few residents knew about her involvement. The playground buzzed with its usual after-school energy when Officer Brennan first approached. Children aged 5 to 15 scattered across the equipment, some climbing the new rope structures, others testing their balance on the wobbling bridge. A few engaged in an elaborate game of tag that spanned the entire area. Parents and caregivers dotted the perimeter, some pushing strollers, others deep in conversation about school events and weekend plans. Zoe had been showing Marcus Chen how to properly pump his legs on the swing when Officer Brennan's voice first cut through the air. "Hey, you!" he called, pointing directly at her. "You in the wheelchair. Come here." She looked around, confused, before pointing to herself questioningly. Her mother had taught her to be polite to authority figures, but something in this man's tone made her stomach tighten with unease. She rolled her chair closer, Marcus Chen jumping down from his swing to walk beside her. "You're damaging the surface with that thing," Brennan announced, gesturing broadly at her custom racing wheelchair. The chair was Zoe's pride and joy, lightweight titanium frame painted electric blue, with racing wheels that her father had saved up for months to buy. "These grounds aren't designed for heavy equipment." Marcus Chen, brave for his 12 years, stepped forward. "Sir, this is a public playground. The rubber surface was installed specifically for wheelchairs. My mom read about it in the community newsletter." Brennan's face darkened. "I don't remember asking for your opinion, kid, and I don't care what some newsletter says. I'm in charge of maintaining these facilities, and I'm telling you this equipment is causing damage." He pointed again at Zoe's wheels, which showed no visible wear on the pristine rubber surface. Other parents began to notice the confrontation. Mrs. Patel, whose twin daughters were on the monkey bars, moved closer with concern etched on her face. Mr. Rodriguez, who coached Little League and knew most of the kids by name, paused his conversation with another father and turned his attention to the growing tension near the swings. Zoe's voice was small, but clear when she spoke. "My mom says this playground is for everyone." She helped make sure it was accessible. Her hands gripped the push rims of her wheels, knuckles showing white against her brown skin. "Your mom doesn't run this community," Brennan snapped, stepping closer to her chair. "I do, and I'm telling you to leave. Now." The gathering crowd of parents exchanged uncomfortable glances. This was their neighborhood playground, a place where children had played safely for years. The addition of accessible equipment had been celebrated by most residents, a sign of progress and inclusion that reflected the community's values. Or so they had thought. Marcus Chen moved protectively closer to Zoe's chair. "We're not doing anything wrong. We're just playing." "I said move along, both of you." Brennan's voice was rising now, attracting more attention from across the playground. "And you, especially," he said, pointing at Zoe. "Need to understand that your equipment doesn't belong in public spaces where it can cause problems." Mrs. Henderson had managed to start recording on her phone, though her hands trembled as she held the device. She had lived in Willowbrook Heights for 15 years and had never seen anything like this. The HOA security was supposed to handle minor infractions like unleashed dogs or noise complaints, not harass children on the playground where they had every right to be. Zoe tried to maneuver her chair around Officer Brennan, seeking to return to the swing set where she had been playing just moments before. "We weren't finished playing," she said quietly, her confidence beginning to waver under his harsh stare. "Oh, but you are finished," Brennan said, stepping directly into her path. "In fact, you people need to learn some respect for community property." The way he emphasized "you people" sent a chill through the watching parents, the implications clear and ugly. "Mr. Rodriguez stepped forward from the group of observers. "Officer, there seems to be some misunderstanding. These children aren't causing any damage or breaking any rules." Brennan whirled around to face him. "Are you questioning my authority? I'm responsible for the safety and maintenance of these facilities, and I'm making a judgment call." A judgment call about a child using playground equipment that was specifically designed for her use. Mrs. Patel had joined the conversation, her voice steady but clearly upset. The county spent thousands of dollars making this playground accessible. How is that damaging anything? The confrontation was escalating beyond what anyone had expected. Zoe sat in her chair, surrounded by adults whose voices were getting louder and angrier, feeling smaller and more frightened with each passing moment. This was supposed to be her safe space, the one place where she could play just like any other kid. Officer Brennan seemed to realize that he was facing opposition from multiple parents, and his demeanor shifted into something more aggressive. "I don't need to justify my decisions to any of you. This is HOA property, and I have the authority to remove anyone who I determine is causing problems." He turned back to Zoe, looming over her chair with obvious intimidation. "I'm going to count to 3. If you're not heading toward the exit, there's going to be consequences." Marcus Chen grabbed the handle of Zoe's chair protectively. "This isn't fair. She's not doing anything wrong." 1, Brennan counted, ignoring the boy's protest. Zoe's eyes darted between the adult faces surrounding her, some angry, some afraid, all focused on a situation that had spiraled completely out of control. "I just want to play on the swings," she whispered, tears starting to form. 2. Mrs. Henderson continued recording, her phone capturing every word and gesture as the situation deteriorated. She had grandchildren Zoe's age, and the thought of them facing this kind of treatment made her sick to her stomach. 3. What happened next would be replayed countless times in courtrooms, news broadcasts, and community meetings over the following months. Officer Brennan reached for Zoe's wheelchair, grabbing the armrest with one hand and the push handle with the other. His intention seemed to be to physically move her chair toward the playground exit, but Zoe instinctively pulled back, trying to maintain her position. The resistance caused Brennan to pull harder, and the physics of the situation took over with horrible inevitability. Zoe's lightweight racing chair, designed for speed and maneuverability rather than stability during confrontations, tipped backward. The rear wheels lifted off the rubber surface. The chair balanced precariously for one terrifying moment. And then, gravity claimed its victory. The sound of the wheelchair hitting the ground was sharp and metallic, but it was nothing compared to the collective gasp from the watching parents and children. Zoe tumbled from her seat, her small body hitting the rubber mat with a thud that seemed to echo across the entire playground. For a moment, time seemed suspended. The afternoon breeze still rustled through the oak trees that bordered the playground. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. A car door slammed in the parking lot. But everyone within sight of the playground was frozen, processing what they had just witnessed. Zoe lay on her side next to her overturned wheelchair, her yellow hair ribbons bright against the dark rubber surface. Her eyes were wide with shock and pain, and when she tried to push herself up, her left wrist bent at an angle that made several parents wince. "Oh my God!" "Mrs. Patel breathed, rushing forward. "Zoe, honey, don't move. Let us help you." Marcus Chen dropped to his knees beside his friend, his young face pale with fear and anger. "Why did you do that?" he shouted at Officer Brennan. "She wasn't hurting anyone." Mr. Rodriguez was already on his phone, calling 911 with steady hands despite his obvious fury. "We need an ambulance at Willowbrook Heights Playground. A child has been injured by a security officer." Officer Brennan stood over the scene, his face cycling through emotions: surprise, concern, defensive anger, and then a calculating look that suggested he was already formulating his version of events. "She resisted lawful orders," he announced to no one in particular. "I was attempting to escort her from the premises when she became combative." "Combative?" Mrs. Henderson's voice cracked with disbelief as she continued recording. "She's a 12-year-old girl who was trying to use a swing. You just assaulted a child with disabilities." The word assault seemed to hit Brennan like a slap. His defensive posture became more pronounced, and he began reaching for the radio on his belt. "I'm calling this in as a disturbance with an uncooperative subject. Everyone needs to step back and let me handle this situation." But the parents weren't stepping back. If anything, they were moving closer, forming a protective circle around Zoe while Mrs. Patel gently examined her injured wrist. The community that had seemed divided just moments before was suddenly unified in their shock and anger at what they had witnessed. Zoe's tears had started in earnest now, not just from physical pain, but from the overwhelming confusion and fear of the situation. "I want my mom," she whispered to Mrs. Patel, who was stroking her hair with gentle hands. "We're going to call her right now, sweetheart," Mrs. Patel assured her. "Do you know her number?" Marcus Chen answered for his friend. "Her mom works at the courthouse. She's Judge Williams." The name hit the gathered adults like a physical force. Judge Patricia Williams was one of the most respected figures in the county, tough but fair, known for her advocacy for civil rights and her particular passion for disability justice. She was also known for her fierce protection of her daughter and her zero tolerance for discrimination in any form. Officer Brennan's face went pale as the implications sank in. He had just physically confronted the daughter of the county's chief judge, and it had been captured on video by multiple witnesses. His radio call suddenly seemed less urgent as he processed the magnitude of his situation. Mrs. Henderson lowered her phone. The recording complete. "I think Judge Williams is going to be very interested in seeing this footage," she said quietly. But her words carried across the playground with perfect clarity. The sound of sirens in the distance began to grow louder, cutting through the tense atmosphere that had settled over the playground. The ambulance that Mr. Rodriguez had called was approaching, along with what sounded like police vehicles. The afternoon that had started with children's laughter was transforming into something none of them had ever expected to witness in their quiet community. Zoe struggled to sit up, helped by Mrs. Patel's steady hands. Her wrist was clearly sprained, possibly broken, and there were scrapes on her arm from the fall. But the physical injuries seemed secondary to the emotional trauma written across her young face, the confusion of a child who had been targeted for reasons she couldn't understand. "Can someone help me get my chair upright?" she asked quietly, looking at the overturned wheelchair that represented so much more than just mobility equipment. It was her independence, her freedom, her ability to participate in the world on equal terms. Marcus Chen and Mr. Rodriguez worked together to right the wheelchair, checking it carefully for damage. The blue frame was scratched, but intact, though one of the racing wheels was slightly bent from the impact. It would need professional repair, another cost and inconvenience added to the growing list of consequences from Officer Brennan's actions. As the sirens grew closer, other community members began arriving at the playground. Word was spreading through the neighborhood with the speed that only shocking news can achieve. Parents who had been preparing dinner stopped their cooking and rushed over. Dog walkers changed their routes to see what was happening. Even residents from the apartment complex across the street began gathering at the playground's edge. Officer Brennan seemed to realize that his version of events was going to face significant scrutiny. He began backing away from the crowd, speaking urgently into his radio in terms that were too quiet for the parents to hear clearly. But his body language spoke volumes: hunched shoulders, darting eyes, the demeanor of someone who knew he had made a terrible mistake. The first emergency vehicle to arrive was the ambulance, its red and white colors bright against the autumn afternoon. Two paramedics jumped out, their professional calm a stark contrast to the emotional intensity that had been building at the playground. They approached Zoe with gentle competence, asking questions about her pain level and carefully examining her injured wrist. "Can you tell me what happened, sweetheart?" the female paramedic asked, as she gently probed Zoe's wrist for signs of fracture. Zoe looked up at the circle of concerned adult faces surrounding her. "I was just playing on the swings. The officer said I was damaging the playground with my wheelchair. But that doesn't make sense. Mom always says this playground was built for kids like me too." The male paramedic glanced over at Officer Brennan, who was still speaking into his radio near the playground entrance. "And how did you end up on the ground?" "He grabbed my chair and pulled it, and I fell backward," Zoe explained, wincing as the paramedic gently manipulated her wrist. "I wasn't trying to fight him. I just didn't want to leave." Mrs. Henderson stepped forward, holding up her phone. "I have the entire incident recorded, if that would be helpful for your report." The paramedics exchanged a meaningful look. As first responders, they had seen many situations involving conflicts between citizens and various types of security personnel. But an incident involving a disabled child was particularly serious. They would need to document everything carefully, especially given the potential legal implications. Police cars were pulling into the playground parking lot now, their presence adding another layer of complexity to an already difficult situation. Officer Brennan straightened his shoulders and walked toward the approaching officers, with an air of professional confidence that seemed forced given the circumstances. Zoe watched the police cars with growing anxiety. "Am I in trouble?" she asked Mrs. Patel, who was still kneeling beside her. "No, honey, you're not in trouble at all," Mrs. Patel assured her. "The police are here to make sure everyone is safe and to find out what really happened." Detective Sarah Morrison was the first officer to approach the crowd around Zoe. She was known in the community for her patient approach to difficult situations and her particular skill with cases involving children. Her presence seemed to calm some of the tension that had been building among the parents. "I'm Detective Morrison." She introduced herself to the group. "Can someone tell me what happened here?" The parents began speaking at once, their voices overlapping as they tried to explain the incident. Detective Morrison held up a hand for quiet, and then addressed Zoe directly. "Hi there. I'm Sarah. Can you tell me your name?" "Zoe Williams," the girl replied, her voice still shaky, but growing stronger with the supportive presence of the adults around her. Detective Morrison's eyebrows rose slightly at the surname, but she continued with her professional demeanor. "Zoe, can you tell me what you were doing when this started?" As Zoe recounted her version of events, Detective Morrison took careful notes. The story was consistent with what the parents had witnessed, and it painted a clear picture of a routine playground visit that had escalated into an unnecessary confrontation. Meanwhile, Officer Brennan was giving his statement to another police officer near the parking lot. Even from a distance, it was clear that his version of events differed significantly from what the witnesses were reporting. His gestures were animated, his voice occasionally rising in what seemed to be defensive explanations. The paramedics had completed their initial assessment of Zoe's injuries. "We need to take her to the hospital for x-rays," the female paramedic announced. "That wrist definitely needs to be looked at by a doctor, and we want to make sure there are no other injuries from the fall." "Can someone call my mom?" Zoe asked, looking around at the faces that had become familiar over the past hour. "She's probably still at work, but she needs to know what happened." Detective Morrison pulled out her own phone. "I'll call Judge Williams myself. She'll want to meet us at the hospital." The mention of Judge Williams sent another ripple through the growing crowd of community members. Those who knew her by reputation understood that this incident was about to become much larger than a simple playground dispute. Judge Williams was not someone who would allow an attack on her daughter to go unanswered, especially when it involved discrimination and excessive force. As the paramedics prepared to load Zoe into the ambulance, Marcus Chen stepped forward. "Can I ride with her? She's my best friend, and she's scared." The paramedics looked to Detective Morrison, who nodded approvingly. "That's fine, as long as his parents consent." Mr. Chen, who had arrived at the playground after hearing about the incident from neighbors, quickly agreed. "Of course. Marcus, you stay with Zoe and make sure she's okay. We'll meet you at the hospital." As the ambulance pulled away from the playground, its lights flashing but siren silent, the remaining parents and community members turned their attention back to Officer Brennan. He was still speaking with police officers, but his confident demeanor was clearly cracking under the pressure of the situation. Mrs. Henderson approached Detective Morrison with her phone. "I have video of the entire incident. Would you like me to send it to you?" "That would be very helpful," Detective Morrison replied. "Can you also provide me with your contact information and a written statement of what you witnessed?" Other parents began volunteering their own accounts of what they had seen. The consistency of their stories was remarkable, all describing an unprovoked confrontation that escalated when Officer Brennan physically grabbed Zoe's wheelchair and caused her to fall. At the county courthouse, Judge Patricia Williams was reviewing case files when her secretary knocked on her office door. Judge Williams, there's a Detective Morrison on line 1. She says it's urgent and concerns Zoe. Patricia's heart stopped for a moment before racing into overdrive. Urgent calls about her daughter were every parent's worst nightmare, made worse by the fact that Zoe's disability sometimes made her more vulnerable in certain situations. Judge Williams, this is Detective Morrison with the county police. Your daughter is okay, but there's been an incident at the Willowbrook Heights playground. As the detective explained what had happened, Patricia's emotions cycled rapidly through fear, relief that Zoe was alive, and then a cold fury that someone had dared to assault her child. "I'm leaving for the hospital immediately," she said, her voice deadly calm in the way that experienced attorneys and judges recognized as a sign of impending legal warfare. "Judge, there's something else you should know. The entire incident was recorded by multiple witnesses. It's going to be very clear what actually happened." Patricia closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Video evidence was both a blessing and a curse. It would prove Zoe's innocence and Brennan's guilt. But it would also mean that her daughter's trauma would be preserved forever, potentially replayed countless times in courtrooms and news broadcasts. "Detective Morrison, I want this man arrested and charged with assault on a minor. I also want a full investigation into the HOA's policies and training procedures. This cannot be allowed to stand." "I understand your concerns, Judge. We're treating this very seriously." As Patricia gathered her things and prepared to leave the courthouse, she was already formulating the legal strategy that would ensure justice for Zoe and accountability for everyone involved. Officer Brennan had picked the wrong child to target, and he was about to discover just how costly that mistake would be. Back at the playground, the crowd was continuing to grow as news of the incident spread through social media and neighborhood chat groups. Parents who hadn't witnessed the event were arriving to hear first-hand accounts from those who had been there. The collective anger was palpable, directed not just at Officer Brennan, but at the systems that had allowed this to happen. Detective Morrison finished taking statements from the primary witnesses and approached Officer Brennan, who was still being questioned by uniformed officers. The conversation was clearly not going well for him, as his story continued to conflict with the accounts provided by multiple credible witnesses. "Officer Brennan, I need to speak with you about the incident involving Zoe Williams," Detective Morrison said formally. Brennan's face was flushed and sweaty despite the cool afternoon air. "I was performing my duties according to HOA regulations. The subject was using equipment that was potentially damaging community property, and she became combative when I attempted to escort her from the premises. Multiple witnesses state that you physically grabbed her wheelchair and caused her to fall backward. They describe her as cooperative and non-threatening throughout the encounter." Witnesses can be mistaken. They don't understand the complexities of security work. Detective Morrison held up Mrs. Henderson's phone, which showed the video of the incident paused at the moment when Brennan grabbed Zoe's chair. "This video seems pretty clear about what happened. Would you like to revise your statement?" The color drained from Brennan's face as he realized that his version of events wasn't going to hold up against video evidence. "I want to speak with a lawyer before saying anything else." "That's your right," Detective Morrison replied. "Marcus Brennan, you're under arrest for assault on a minor. You have the right to remain silent." The reading of Miranda rights was clearly audible to the parents still gathered at the playground, and a cheer went up from the crowd. Justice was beginning, but everyone understood that this was just the first step in what would likely be a long process. At the hospital, Zoe was being examined by Dr. Elizabeth Santos, a pediatric orthopedist who had treated many children with disabilities over her career. The X-rays showed a hairline fracture in Zoe's wrist, requiring a cast and several weeks of healing time. "You're going to be fine, sweetheart," Dr. Santos assured her as she applied the cast. "This should heal completely in about 6 weeks, and then you'll be back to racing around the playground in no time." Marcus Chen had stayed by Zoe's side throughout the medical examination, holding her uninjured hand and cracking jokes to keep her spirits up. Their friendship had been tested by crisis and had emerged even stronger. When Judge Patricia Williams arrived at the hospital, she swept into the emergency room with the presence and authority that had made her one of the most respected legal figures in the state. She was a tall woman with silver-streaked hair and eyes that could convey both compassion and steel, depending on the circumstances. Right now, they showed both as she rushed to her daughter's side. "Mom," Zoe called out, reaching for her mother with her uninjured arm. "I'm okay, but my wrist is broken, and they said I can't use my racing wheels for 6 weeks." Patricia embraced her daughter carefully, mindful of the fresh cast and the emotional trauma that was probably worse than the physical injuries. "I'm so proud of how brave you've been. And don't worry about the racing wheels, we'll figure that out together." Dr. Santos approached with Zoe's discharge papers and medication instructions. "She's going to be fine physically. Judge Williams, the fracture was clean and should heal without complications. But you might want to consider some counseling to help her process what happened emotionally." Patricia nodded, already making mental notes about the best child psychologists in the area. "Doctor, I'll need copies of all the medical records and your professional assessment of how these injuries occurred. This is going to become a legal matter." Of course, the injury pattern is completely consistent with a backward fall from a seated position. There's no doubt about the mechanism of injury. As they prepared to leave the hospital, Detective Morrison approached with an update on the case. "Judge Williams, Officer Brennan has been arrested and charged with assault on a minor. The video evidence is very clear, and we have multiple witness statements that corroborate your daughter's account." "What about the HOA's liability in this matter?" Patricia asked, her legal mind already working through the various angles of accountability. "That's outside my jurisdiction. But I would imagine they're going to face significant scrutiny over their hiring and training practices." Patricia helped Zoe into their car, making sure her cast was properly supported and that she was comfortable for the drive home. As they pulled out of the hospital parking lot, Zoe looked up at her mother with questions in her eyes. "Mom, why did he say those things about me? Why did he act like I didn't belong there?" It was the question Patricia had been dreading, the one that required her to explain the existence of prejudice and discrimination to a child who had been raised to believe in equality and inclusion. Some people haven't learned yet that everyone deserves to be treated with respect and dignity. That doesn't make it right, and it doesn't make it your fault. "Will he go to jail?" "He's going to face consequences for what he did, and we're going to make sure that this never happens to another child." That evening, Mrs. Henderson uploaded her video of the incident to social media with a detailed description of what had occurred. Within hours, it had been shared thousands of times, with comments ranging from outrage to support for Zoe to calls for reform of HOA security practices. The video caught the attention of civil rights organizations, disability advocacy groups, and local news stations. By the next morning, the story was being covered by regional television news, and by that afternoon, it had gained national attention. The Willowbrook Heights HOA board found themselves facing a crisis they had never anticipated. Board President Robert Manning received dozens of angry phone calls and emails from residents demanding explanations and accountability. The HOA's insurance company was already discussing potential liability issues, and their attorney was advising immediate policy reviews and damage control measures. Officer Brennan was released on bail pending trial, but his employment with the HOA Security Service was immediately terminated. The security company that employed him began conducting internal reviews of their training protocols and hiring standards, knowing that they would likely face their own legal challenges. Zoe returned to school the next day, with her arm in a cast, and her story spreading through the student body like wildfire. Her classmates rallied around her with a level of support that surprised even the teachers. Marcus Chen became something of a hero himself for his loyalty and courage in standing up to an adult authority figure. The incident had transformed what could have been a source of shame and trauma into a catalyst for community action and positive change. Students at Zoe's school began organizing disability awareness events. Parents in the neighborhood started attending HOA meetings to demand better oversight of security personnel. Local disability rights organizations reached out to offer support and resources. Judge Patricia Williams, meanwhile, was preparing a legal strategy that went far beyond seeking justice for her daughter's specific case. She saw an opportunity to create systemic change that would protect other children from similar experiences. 2 weeks after the incident, the Willowbrook Heights Community Center was packed for an emergency town hall meeting called by the HOA board. The room buzzed with tension as residents filed in, many carrying signs supporting Zoe and demanding accountability for what had happened at their neighborhood playground. Zoe sat in the front row with her parents, her cast bright white against her blue dress. The sight of the young girl who had become the center of the controversy seemed to focus everyone's attention on the real issues at stake, the safety and inclusion of all community members, especially the most vulnerable. Board President Manning called the meeting to order with obvious reluctance. "We're here tonight to address the incident that occurred at our community playground 2 weeks ago. We want to assure everyone that we take this matter very seriously." Mrs. Henderson stood up immediately. "Taking it seriously isn't enough. A child was assaulted by security personnel that your board hired and empowered. We need to know how this happened and what you're going to do to make sure it never happens again." A chorus of agreement rose from the packed room. Parents who had been at the playground that day described what they had witnessed. Other residents shared their own concerning interactions with HOA security. The picture that emerged was of a security force that had been given too much authority with too little oversight or training. Mr. Rodriguez presented a petition signed by over 200 community members demanding the resignation of the entire HOA board and a complete overhaul of security policies. "You failed in your most basic responsibility, protecting the children in our community. That failure has consequences." When it was her turn to speak, Judge Patricia Williams rose with the dignity and presence that commanded attention in courtrooms, and now filled the community center. "My daughter was targeted for being different. She was assaulted for using equipment that was specifically designed for her use. But this isn't just about Zoe. It's about what kind of community we want to be." She paused to look around the room, making eye contact with residents she had known for years. "I'm filing a federal civil rights lawsuit against the HOA, the security company, and Officer Brennan. But lawsuits only address past harm. What we need now is a commitment to building a community where every child is safe, welcome, and valued." The room erupted in applause, but Patricia held up her hand for continued attention. "I'm also proposing the creation of a community oversight committee to review all security policies and procedures. We need transparency, accountability, and training that reflects our values of inclusion and respect. Board member Sarah Chen Marcus's mother seconded the proposal immediately. I move that we accept Judge Williams's proposal and begin implementing these changes immediately. We also need to issue a formal apology to Zoe and her family for what happened in our community. The vote was unanimous, even among board members who had initially been defensive about the incident. The community's outrage had made clear that anything less than complete accountability and reform would be unacceptable. Over the following months, the Willowbrook Heights community underwent a transformation that surprised even the most optimistic residents. The Oversight Committee established new training requirements for all security personnel, emphasizing de-escalation techniques and disability awareness. The playground received additional accessibility improvements, funded by donations from community members who wanted to honor Zoe's experience with positive action. Officer Marcus Brennan pled guilty to assault charges and was sentenced to community service, anger management counseling, and mandatory disability sensitivity training. His guilty plea eliminated the need for Zoe to testify in court, sparing her additional trauma while still ensuring accountability. The civil rights lawsuit resulted in a substantial settlement that funded accessibility improvements throughout the county and established a scholarship program for students with disabilities. More importantly, it led to policy changes that required better training and oversight for security personnel in residential communities across the state. Zoe's cast came off 6 weeks after the incident, and she was back to racing around the playground on the day the doctor cleared her for full activity. The playground had become more than just a place to play. It was a symbol of what communities could accomplish when they chose inclusion over exclusion, justice over indifference. The incident that had begun with one man's prejudice and ended with a child's injury had somehow transformed into a catalyst for positive change that reached far beyond their small community. Other neighborhoods began reviewing their own security policies. School districts implemented new anti-discrimination training. Parents became more engaged in local governance, determined to prevent similar incidents in their own communities. On a warm spring afternoon, 6 months after the incident, Zoe organized the first annual Willowbrook Heights Inclusion Day at the community playground. Children with and without disabilities played together on equipment that had been designed for everyone. Parents who had once been strangers had become friends through their shared commitment to creating a better community. Judge Patricia Williams watched her daughter race her friend Marcus Chen to the swing set, both children laughing as they competed in the same spirit of fun that had been interrupted so tragically months before. The cast was gone, but the lessons learned from that difficult day would last forever. Mrs. Henderson, now serving as chair of the Community Oversight Committee, approached Judge Williams with a smile. "Look at what we've built together. Zoe should be proud of how her courage helped create all of this." Patricia nodded, watching her daughter pump her legs on the swing with pure joy. She already is. But more importantly, she knows that she belongs here, that she's valued here, and that this community will protect her and every other child who needs it. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the playground as children continued to play, their laughter mixing with the sounds of a community that had learned to celebrate diversity rather than fear it. Officer Brennan's act of cruelty had been transformed through the power of collective action into something beautiful, a place where every child could play safely, regardless of their abilities or differences. As evening approached and families began to gather their belongings, Zoe rolled her wheelchair over to where her mother was sitting. "Mom, can we come back tomorrow? Marcus wants to practice his swing technique, and I promise to help him." "Of course, sweetheart. This playground belongs to everyone, and that includes you." The simple statement carried the weight of everything they had fought for and won the right to belong, the promise of protection, and the power of a community that chose love over hate. In the end, that was the most important victory of all.